Aristotle had this idea that philosophy first took root in Egypt because the priests there had free time. Whether he was right about Egypt is beside the point. What's interesting is why he said it. He was putting his finger on something real. Philosophy needs time. Time to sit and wonder and take a stab at what's actually going on underneath the surface of the world. Actually, for that matter, even if you're not trying to do philosophy, even if you just want to get on with your life, you still have to philosophize a little. You have to pause long enough to work out some rough theory of how things work and how to deal with them. Otherwise, you will get blindsided and knocked out of the game even from early on. But going beyond that rough working theory, actually following the threads and building something coherent that holds up to logic and to experience, that's a real undertaking. It takes a certain freedom from the constant noise of other demands. And that kind of freedom only really exists when society is stable and prosperous enough to allow it. You have to be past the bare fight for survival, whether that's fighting other people or fighting nature. There have to be stretches of peace and some reliable income, which allows you not to scramble long enough to breathe and look around. So, philosophy is essentially a luxury that requires a society rich enough to afford it and civilized enough to want it. Aristotle also mentions the priesthood, and that immediately raises the question of what philosophy has to do with religion. Most of us feel that connection pretty instinctively. But why? Why should caring about one naturally pull you toward the other? In short, why, before we get to Greek philosophy, do we need to talk about ancient religion first? To answer that properly, you have to think a bit about what religion actually is. Here is a way into it. Picture yourself sitting in a coffee shop, looking through the window at a person standing on the sidewalk. If you nudge whoever's next to you and ask what they make of that person, chances are they'll say something like, "I don't know, I just have certain impressions about them." You will have to push pretty hard before they start actually reasoning it out. We know this phenomenon best through what people call intuitions. Those first feelings that arrive before any reasoning has taken place and which often survive no matter how much reasoning is thrown at them afterward. We all have versions of this about the world itself. These aren't conclusions we've reasoned our way to. They are there before our intellect has even looked at them, and they often stick around after our intellect has done everything it can to dislodge them. They are irrational, not in the sense of being necessarily wrong, because your first impression of a person might turn out to be exactly right, but in the sense that reasoning had nothing to do with producing them. They are prejudices in the original sense of the word, things that exist before judgment. The big question they raise is whether to trust them. Are they somehow a shortcut to kind of contact with reality that careful reasoning can never quite reach? Or are they dead ends? After all, superstitions and obviously unfounded gut feelings are just as deeply embedded in us as the intuitions people treat as revelations. Maybe the long way around, careful, patient thinking, is actually the faster route home, whatever home even means here. Religion lives in this territory of feeling and intuition. It starts as a feeling about the world that comes before any process of careful reasoning from evidence. When you start to define and defend that feeling, when you argue that what you intuitively sense about the nature of reality is logically sound and backed by the available evidence, you've moved from religion into theology. And because people interpret this original feeling differently and describe what their intuition is pointing to in different ways, you get the various systems that have crystallized around it: Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, and so on. But the underlying feeling that all these systems are trying to articulate seems to be the same thing. It's the sense that at the heart of the world, there is something that is in some way like us, something we can reach out to and receive something back from. You could almost say religion is a feeling of personal relationship with whatever is deepest in the universe, an impression that behind the surface of things there is another self of sorts, something you can relate to, the way you relate to another person. And as human moral experience has grown, and the sense of what perfection might look like has gotten sharper and more urgent, this something at the core of things has come to feel more and more like it's on the side of the good, like a friend you can go to for guidance and support in trying to be better, with the trust that you won't be turned away. We all know what it's like to go for a walk with a friend versus going alone, even if that friend is just a dog or a horse. You might walk single file the whole time and hear nothing from them, or you might both be lost in your own thoughts, or the dog might be off in his own world and the horse picking along so quietly you forget he's there. And yet it's different, unmistakably different from going alone. The same thing shows up in other ways. The difference between walking into an empty house and walking into one where someone lives. The empty one feels cold and indifferent, nothing responding to your presence but echoes. The occupied one feels warm and personal, even if you can't see anyone. A Catholic walking into a Protestant church feels something missing, the absence of the real presence of Christ in Eucharist bread. And for him, the church feels hollow and strange because of it. That's what religious experience is saying about the universe. It's not empty. It's occupied. Life isn't a solo trip. It's more like walking with a companion whose presence you can't see but can feel. And that feeling changes everything.